welcome to Camp Constitution Radio with your host, Hal Shurtleff. This show is heard on WBCQ every Monday evening at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, broadcast out of Aroostook County in the beautiful town of Monticello, Maine. And it's also heard on IPMNation.org, which is an online 24-hour news source out of New Hampshire, Saturday afternoons at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and tune in radio. You put in just put in WBCQ, and you'll be able to listen not only to this show but to all of the shows on WBCQ. And you can also visit WBCQ's website to get more information about this great station and how you might be able to have your own show. Anyway, this show is hosted or sponsored by Camp Constitution, and I happen to serve as its full-time director as well as being a co-founder. And you can visit our website, campconstitution.net. And, well, folks, we just finished our annual camp, 2017 annual camp, and it was the biggest turnout we had. And we had well over 100 people. Some people were there for the whole week. Some people stayed for a few days, 6 days, and a lot of people just visited for the day. And it was an incredible experience. We had some top instructors. Now, every year we have great instructors, but I think this year we did a little bit more than normal. We had world-renowned climate realist, Professor Willie Soon, and not only that, but he came with his whole family. He's got a beautiful family, 2 boys and a girl and his wife. And we had Alex Newman, and Alex, I've had the honor of knowing him for a couple of years. Alex Newman, he was a guest on the show a few times. He is the co-author of Crimes of the Educators, written, co-authored by the late Sam Blumenfeld. And, of course, if you're a regular listener to the show, you know that we archived Sam Blumenfeld's materials. And what was interesting about Alex is that he and Sam had co-authored the book, and they never met formally. Most of their correspondence was either by email or by Skype and other social media ways. And I called Alex when Sam was in very bad shape physically and didn't look like he was going to live much longer. And Alex had planned to visit him in the summer of 2015, and it was here it was in late May, actually. And I said, Alex, you got to come up and see him. So we were able to, thanks to a friend of mine, able to fly him up, and we got a chance to meet Sam. We were really hoping to do an interview, but it was a few days before Sam died, and he just was not didn't have the strength to do that. But it was very nice that I was able to help get them to meet each other. Even though they were friends, they knew each other, just didn't meet in person. And Alex did an incredible job. And he comes up from Florida, and he couldn't stay very long. He just came up Saturday afternoon and left pretty much right after his class, with a short time after his class. I think he left around, about noontime or so, after lunch. And I had to really thank him for coming up and giving us the time. And he hopes to come back next year. It's interesting, too. Alex has traveled pretty much around the world and speaks several languages. And he has property in a home in Sweden where he doesn't live there full time, but he's there. And he told me the problems in Sweden. Pretty much Sweden is on its way out. And I know some of you might be listening in Sweden and speak the language, the English language, and I feel for you. Your people have a death wish. Yeah, once great independent people have become basically socialists. They bought into the homosexual agenda, Christianization, and the notion that Sweden must be a haven for Muslims. And Alex told me about the town. I can't remember the name of the town. He said he's in a rural area, but it's the closest town. And he said this town was a very peaceful place, very quiet. And he said it is now an almost unlivable Muslim enclave. And that was just in the last few years. And pretty much the way things are going, there's no indication that it will ever change without revival. Let's face it. They said Sweden's gone. It is gone. It's going to be a Muslim-dominant country, and it will be a microcosm of what's going to happen to the rest of Europe and in the United States if we don't get our act together. Interesting too about this notion of refugees. Now, historically, when there might be a civil war in a country or a war in general, and it results in refugees, hundreds of thousands of, not millions of people. But generally, when things change or calm down, or when the war is over, with few exceptions, most of those people come back to the country of origin. In World War II, there was plenty of refugees. So interesting, and we handled it a little differently. We handled it incorrectly in World War II because we knew that when we returned these people back to Stalin, that they were going to be murdered. It was a little different situation. But, if you have an invading army and they come through your town and village, you need to get the heck out of there. They're going to destroy everything. So, you're going to be a refugee. But generally, again, historically, the people return back to the country of origin. But that doesn't seem to be the case in Syria. Syria is a problem that we helped create. The Western Europe, and we have to get rid of Assad. So we ended up helping create this ISIS, ISIL, whatever you want to call it, and fund them and promote them. And because you have a guy who was, he might not be a benevolent laissez-faire dictator, but treats the Christians pretty well, and he's not a threat to the rest of the world, at least to some extent he wasn't. He wasn't a militant Muslim. And now you've got civil war, you've got millions of refugees, and this notion that they have to come west. Well, why don't the Muslim nations take them? Well, Turkey's taken some, but why doesn't Saudi Arabia take them? Saudi Arabia is smart. They're not taking those folks. They're using them as really cannon fodder to colonize Western Europe and the United States and Canada. That's what's happening. That's the reality. And it's interesting, too, in Sweden, it's one of the most pro-homosexual agenda nations on the planet. If you actually articulate it in public that you believe homosexuality is a sin, you will go to jail. It's not just a fine. You will do jail time. It is a serious crime. And when their parliament passed that law, it was unanimous. But Muslims are immune to that law. They're not subject to that law. So you can be a Muslim in Sweden and say, down with homosexuals. Homosexuals are sinful, they're decadent, what have you, and you get away with it. But if you happen to be a non-Muslim, whether you're a Christian or a Jew or an atheist or whatever, you say that, you're going to jail. So, Sweden, you deserve what you get. I hate to say it, but you have a death wish. And if you don't get back right with the Lord, you're doomed. Your children and grandchildren are going to be living in this stinkhole, a third world stinkhole, and you're going to be subjects of a Muslim Sharia law. And then you're going to be a refugee. You want to come here? You think you're going to come here and then bring the same stuff here that you left there? That's another thing, too. When people leave bad countries because of economic policies, you think they come here and say, hey, we want to embrace liberty and freedom. No, you bring your socialism with you. Like people from Massachusetts and New Jersey and New York, they moved to New Hampshire. Now we want to get out of this terrible tax rate, but we bring our socialism and our socialistic ways. That's not how it's supposed to work, folks. You should reject those ways. You leave like these Mexicans. Oh, we love Mexico. We hate America, but we're coming here to get jobs. And boy, we want to turn the United States into Mexico. Why? Where are you going to go when the United States becomes Mexico? Where are you going to go, folks? Nowhere else to go. I just don't get it. It's just this crazy belief system. It's like the notion that there are 50 or 60 genders, and people actually people with medical degrees will take this serious. It's really bizarre. Anyway, getting back to our wonderful camp program, Alex was just a real treat. And by the way, all of the presentations are on YouTube, or will be. And now today is Monday, July 17th, and we already have uploaded one of Willie Soon's presentations on climate change. And it is a little treat. I don't think it's gone viral, but we got close to 2,000 views already in just about 4 or 5 days. Now, 2,000 in the YouTube world, when some of these people get 1 million every half hour, isn't much, but I think we're just getting started. And just think of 2,000 people in a room is pretty impressive, isn't it? There's our little camp. We attracted about 100, to 120 people, and already we've got a couple of thousand views for one of our classes. I think it's a real good project. Alex did talk about his book, and the name of his presentation was Crimes of the Educators, and he does a phenomenal job, and I hope you take a look at it. Camp Constitution, just go right to YouTube and put in Camp Constitution, and we have a list, what the YouTube terminology is, a playlist, and it Camp Constitution 2017. So Alex's presentation's up there, and he just lays it out, a history of public education in the United States, the problems with it, who the bad guys are. They name names. We like to name names. We don't just say, oh, it's the elite, and then we don't name who the elite are. Anybody can say that. Rush Limbaugh will say, oh, the media elite. And then when you say, yeah, there is a media elite, they come from groups like Council on Foreign Relations. Oh, you're a conspiracy kook. You're a conspiracy. Well, then you talk about the elite, but you don't want to name it. So we name names. He talks about John Dewey, and he talks about these so-called progressive educators. He talks about Horace Mann, who was the pioneer in this madness back in the 1840s, and his philosophical worldview, and John Dewey's atheism and humanism. And we talk about some of the more recent people behind us, the Bill Gates with his miserable Common Core and so forth. So we like to name names. We're not just sitting back and throwing out these terms and not pointing the fingers at people that should be. But we also offer solutions, because just having a lot of bad news and a lot of hearing about bad things isn't going to be helpful. But lots of hope in this country, folks, in the United States. And I like to think other parts of the world. There's little embers of freedom that are starting to come out of Europe. The getting out of Britain, getting out of Brexit, European Union, and even though Marine Le Pen didn't win, it was very close. And so it's going to take a while, but hopefully there'll be a restoration of liberty and freedom, not just in the United States, but around the world. For some reason, the world has embraced socialism and all of the evils, but I like to think little by little people are going to be rejecting it. That's our optimistic message too. So Willie's Professor Soon. He gave 2 classes. The first one, he deals with the climate change issue, and he has an incredible. He's a very funny, engaging person, and a humble man, a brilliant guy. And it was interesting. We did an article came out about our camp in the Monadnock Ledger. Monadnock comes out of Peterborough, New Hampshire. It's just a few towns from or our camp was. So it's a regional. Comes out twice a week. And the report, a very liberal newspaper, like most newspapers in the United States, whether they're daily or weekly. But he was very fair, good guy. Came out, Tony, and he did a nice story. And there was people going out. It mentioned Willie Soon, and there was some liberals going after him, denouncing him as a greedy, evil tool of the oil company, and so forth and so on. It's just typical. But Willie handles it very well. Willie showed a short video clip of Al Sharpton attacking Willie Soon, being this tool of the big oil companies, and Willie said he's a scientist. He said his facts are the facts, and you can't change them. And I think he's with the Smithsonian Institute based out of Harvard. He's not affiliated with Harvard University directly, and he doesn't speak on behalf of Smithsonian. He qualifies that. I speak on behalf of Willie Soon. My views are my own, and I wish they were yours. That's how he puts it. But it's very engaging because he's talking to. There's a lot of adults there, but he's also talking mainly to teenagers. And he's trying to explain to them how they're being lied to, the people behind the farce. And this. He talked about the sea level rising. It's going to rise 4 inches in 100 years. He said, if you're not smart enough to take a few steps back, you deserve to drown. So please take a visit. Please look at some of these. We had Larry Pratt. Now, Larry's the head of Gun Owners of America. He came up, another guy coming up. He came in Thursday and had to leave Friday, and we really are so thankful. He gave 2 classes. And one of them was dealing with the Second Amendment and the historical backgrounds of that, and very engaging. And then he gave one that was initially going to be Second Amendment refuting the various cliches or the various accusations against gun owners, but it actually was more of the Bible and the Second Amendment. I thought it went very, very well. He talked about the Old and New Testament. He talked about how Jesus said to his disciples, "Sell your cloak," he said, and buy a sword. And turning the other cheek, but it didn't necessarily mean to be a weak pacifist. It was a different connotation there. And he went out of biblical passages, we're talking about what the Apostle Paul wrote to Timothy, and I think it was 2 Timothy, and he said something to the effect that if you do not take care of your own, you're worse than the infidel. And it didn't just mean buying them clothes and TV sets and nice cars and vacations. It meant providing for their safety. And so it was expected that you were to protect your family and the people around you if possible, and the people in your community and so forth. So, there was a time to turn the other cheek. There was also a time to fight back in defense. And he made a great presentation there. Then we had Reverend Stevie Kraft. Reverend Kraft, who's a regular guest on the show, he's heading out to Africa, missionary field in South Africa. So we're praying for him and his wife. He'll be back in a couple of weeks, and we'll probably have him on the show again talking about some of his experiences. But July 4th, Independence Day. I like to call it Independence Day. We don't celebrate the day. We celebrate what happened on that day. It was my best Independence Day in my life. In 58 years, we started off with Reverend Kraft talking about the faith of the Founding Fathers. And he recorded the numerous founders and their strong belief in God and the Christian faith. Then we had Mrs. Catherine White talk about the lives of some of the founders. There were 56 signers. There were 56 signers, so you couldn't give an hour to all of them. I mean, too many. But she highlighted certain people who signed the Declaration, and she did a really nice job, I thought. She focused on some of those that she appealed most to her. And then we had some great entertainment. We had a magic show. We had a fellow with Mike Piazza, no relation to the baseball player. in his Frisbee dogs, and that should be up on our YouTube channel pretty soon. And then in the evening, we had Dave Kopatz, who's been a friend and a recent guest on the show. Dave and I have been, we had traveled around the region exposing Agenda 21, and Dave is the host of Red Pill Politics, a cable TV show, and he came out, set up his little radio show, and interviewed Willie Soon and Reverend Kraft, and he gave me a short interview. And then we had Richard Howell. Now, Richard is a historian. He lives in Western Massachusetts. We'll get him on the show, and we're bringing him back next year. And he was a speaker a few years ago, but he was dressed as a Continental general. He doesn't depict anyone in particular. He just talks about the history, which kind of makes it easier than trying to be in character. And he just gave an incredible presentation on the Declaration of Independence. He went through it, and he discussed the particulars and the total justification for the colonists to secede. And that I'm looking forward to that one. And that's something you have to probably listen to 5 or 6 times and take notes and have your computer handy so you can get online pretty quickly to follow up. He goes into the rich English history and the various people that influenced the founders. Phenomenal. He did it without notes, so I'm just so impressed with that, and I'm really hoping that we'll have him as a regular instructor. And then we even had a fireworks display down on the lake, and I think we got a little bit of that. I mean, it was a really good fireworks for something we put together in a few days. And then we had Willie Soon. I mentioned his talk on global warming, and he did another one refuting the environmentalists. Now, over the years, we've heard from the population explosion. Paul Ehrlich in 1968 said, I think he said by the mid-'70s that the oceans would all be dead. He said the population, we would be dying of starvation, mass starvation, and they're scaring people to death. And, of course, he called to put sterilants in the water supply like they put fluoride in. And people will still listen to that creep, even all these years later. He talked about the global cooling scare of the 70s, which I remember in my junior high days, that because of the CO2 and other gases and horrible things that we were all going to have another ice age, and summers would no longer exist. Of course, that changed a little bit. That kind of phased out by the mid-'80s, and then we got into ozone hole, and we got into acid rain. I love those two. Ozone holes, of course, when ozone is created by the sun, and when you have areas of the world where there's no sunlight, you're going to have the ozone deplete. And as soon as the sun comes back, but people are so worried that, boy, if I use my candy shaving cream, I'm going to put a big hole. We're all going to get skin cancer, and we're all going to die. And they say, the skin cancer's on the rise. Yeah, it was on the rise, but it had nothing to do with ozone holes. It was mostly found on areas that don't have exposure to sunlight. And a lot of people are panicking about that. And there was the acid rain, and this is the one. I had some, I'm not a scientist, but I can observe and I can draw conclusions based on that observation. That's what scientists do. They just do a whole lot more of it, and in a more controlled environment, and what have you. But acid rain. Now, what was happening was that the rain, they would the various pollutants in the sulfur and so forth in the atmosphere was coming down into the lakes, and it was killing the trees. The trees are all dying from this horrible acid rain. Well, come to find out, it's just the opposite. That acid rain was considered a poor man's fertilizer. That it was great. It was good stuff. And they were saying that, these lakes and streams are all going to be too acidic, the fish will die. And they show you pictures of dead fish, and they show you mountaintops of dead trees, and oh my goodness, but we got to do something about this. Well, the bottom line was there was a few lakes and ponds, thanks to the technology where forest fires could be put out much quicker. Forest fires in the past, they would lose millions of acres, and the ashes would wash into the lakes, and that would lower the acid level. And in many cases, the lakes were reverting back to its natural high acidic levels. It had nothing to do with the atmosphere. It had something to do with technology advancing and making forest fires less prevalent and less damaging. And it was Dr. Michael Kaufman, our late friend Dr. Kaufman, who was part of the Acid Rain Participation Project, funded by the federal government during the Reagan administration. And there were a few lakes where they thought, but all they had to do was simply put lime in there. And he said, we could have done it for pennies to the dollar, nothing to worry about, nothing here, folks. But they said, no, that's not what we want. But nature and time, that rumor and that scare thing went by the wayside. I remember the former governor Dukakis of Massachusetts, who ran against George H.W. Bush unsuccessfully in 1988. He had a press conference at a little pond not too far from my home in Milton, the town of Milton, Massachusetts, which abuts Boston, Turner's Pond. And he said that the acid rain has killed the fish, and this is terrible, and we need to do something. All this scare, fright pedal. And I'm watching this and thinking, boy, this is too bad. It's a sad thing to see that. And it was about 6 months later, maybe a year later, I happened to be there with my daughter, my oldest daughter. She's now in her 30s, and people were fishing, and they were catching sunfish, and they were catching perch, and whatever else they were catching. And I said, you know what? I think we're being lied to. And another time, I was an article in the Boston Globe, and I wish I saved it. It was this is the height of acid rain. The first article was that the acid rain is killing the maple syrup trees, maple sugar trees. And some of these trees are so old that they have tomahawk markings from the Indians tapping the trees, or the Native Americans. And when this article came out, I think it was probably the late 80s. Well, in the mid-90s, I'm going up to Vermont on a regular basis now. I live in Boston. Vermont's not too far away from me, but I go. And here was an article that came out in the wake of the maple sugar crop. They harvest maple syrup. The trees are tapped usually in the early to mid-March. Sometimes as late as April, up in the northern Maine or what have you. And it's about a 2-week time frame. And you have to have sort of warm days and cool nights, the sap will flow and what have you. Anyway, the article said it was the biggest maple syrup crop in the state's history. And so, wait a minute now, back up 5 or 6 years ago, we're being told that all the trees are dying, and there won't be any maple syrup in a few years. And a few years later, we hear that the U.S. Department of Agriculture has confirmed that it's the biggest crop in the state's history. So someone's lying to us. I remember doing an experiment, having a little fun with people. When I was a single guy, I sometimes would take my house plants in the springtime, put them outside and until the frost of February back, in the fall. And there was a spider plant, and I was telling everybody this spider plant that was not too healthy looking inside my apartment, my house. Put it outside in the acid rain, and the thing was like 5 times its size. Not one dead leaf on the thing. It's full of energy and life. And I was telling people, pointing them at that and saying, look what acid rain has done. It's killing my plant. And people were agreeing with me. It was just the power of suggestion. I can show you a picture of dead trees and say acid rain's done this, and you don't even ask. Oh, no, it wasn't killed by acid rain. There were beetles that killed these trees. And that was done all over the country, all over the world, scaring people, lying to people. So Professor Soon did a really good job refuting all this nonsense, absolute nonsense. And by the way, there is a need to preserve the environment. You don't need to lie to people and scare people. Obviously, we need to have clean air, clean water, arable land to farm, and so forth. And it's there. And there are a lot of people who are sincere environmentalists. Most of these so-called environmentalists have no interest in the environment. The same ones that will pay to club baby seals so they can raise money to stop killing baby seals. And people don't. The seal hunters don't even kill baby seals, but it doesn't matter. It's all about scaring people, scamming them into giving them money. So that was covered very well. Reverend Kraft, he did one on I mentioned earlier, he did one on the faith of the founders, but he also did one on color communism and common sense and how the race card is being used to destroy our country. And, not to fall for it. No, our camp makeup is predominantly white. We had Hispanic and blacks and or Asians this year, like every year. We have a good mix. But all these groups are being encouraged by the mass media, by the Soros-funded Black Lives Matter, by La Raza, and all these other groups to hate. And we're not going to be part of that. We're not going to be sucked in. We're not going to buy into it. And we're telling our young people and the middle-aged people, old people, don't buy into it. Don't fall for this nonsense. Don't buy into the racism against blacks, against Hispanics. Don't buy into the racism. And I did a short class. Father Carl, who was another guest, a member of our Speakers Bureau, couldn't make it. But I said, when this racist charge is thrown, challenge it. Challenge it. Don't just sit back and say, be on the defensive. These white liberals live in lily white neighborhoods, and they're calling you racist. And I gave an example. back a few years ago, I was working an information table in the Cheshire Fair, which is in Swansea, New Hampshire, not too far from where our camp was. We held a camp over the years, and we had a petition to Congress, no amnesty. So the guy comes up with his girlfriend, happened to be a black lady, and he said, "I'm a racist." I don't know if he was trying to score points with his girlfriend or what. I said, "That's a serious charge. Now you got to make that. You got to make the case." Well, you're against amnesty. I said, yes. I said, we're a sovereign nation. We have every right to determine who comes in our country, and we don't have to grant amnesty to people who have broken our laws in here. Well, that's racism. I asked him where he was from. He was from a little town, Richmond, New Hampshire, which is about 2,000 people in Lily White. And I said, I can make the case that you're a racist because you live in a town that's all white. Well, I used to live in New York City. Oh, even more so. You left New York City to get away from them. So you're a bigger racist. So I put it back on him. And then I said, how many illegal aliens from Mexico are living in your house? Well, I don't have any. How many illegal aliens would you be willing to bring into your town? How about 2,000? Oh, I wouldn't have any trouble with that. Really? I said, really? I said 2,000 people who don't speak the language, who will not assimilate to the culture and to our ways or what have you, are going to come into your town. I said, he's a libertarian. I said, you know something? If you are converting these people pretty quickly into libertarians, people who believe in liberty and freedom, no problem. But that's not what's happening. They're going to be sucking the town dry of its resources. The taxes go up. The crime will go up. You wouldn't be able to handle the infrastructure. So don't tell me. I said I didn't call him a liar, but he was lying to me because he really doesn't care. He just has this notion. I've got to have this open borders notion. That's what the Libertarian Party promotes. Tell you what. If you can tell me that these folks will not be getting any taxpayers' money, will not be breaking the laws to a large degree and draining the economy, then talk to me about open borders. Or if you'll be financially responsible for them, then talk to me about. But until then, you have no case here. And so I said, do not let these people put you on the defenses. Put them on the defensive. We're the ones that have the truth. They don't. So anyway, we've got a couple of minutes left, so I get a little started here. I'm not generally bombastic, but sometimes I get a little ticked off when these ridiculous charges, these zombies, and make these stupid accusations. They don't even think things through. And again, we tell people not to fall for it. So it was a great camp year, and we want to expand our camp program because once you see what we do at our camp, you think, why? We know that it's needed. And it's not just needed for young people, but people from all ages. And the Constitution is something that needs to be adopted by nations of the world. Forget about the UN Charter, the UN international agreements. The U.S. Constitution is what you need, folks. If you're listening to that's what you need to embrace. But most of you people aren't ready for it because you don't understand liberty, government, and freedom, personal responsibility. And I was telling Alex Newman, I said, we need to have a camp like this in Sweden. I said, we would all be arrested by the first day of classes. Can you imagine that if we try to do something like this in Western Europe, it would be a crime? Even in Canada, they'd probably shut us down. That shows you, folks, that liberty free speech is not too popular in other parts of the world. So please consider helping it. Don't consider. Help us. Help us get the message out. If you're listener of the show, go to our website, make a monthly donation, $5. $5 is like 2 or 3 cups of coffee a month. That will go a long way. Help us out more, $10, what have you. We now have a 501c3 arm that we partner with, Christian Citizens Ministries. So if you have to go through a 501c3, give it to them. We're partners now, and we'll be able to use those resources. You want to be a sponsor. If you own a business, for a donation of $100 a year, you become a camp sponsor. You put your company logo up on the website. You can give us more, but we'll take a minimum of 100. And if we had hundreds of people doing this, we would be able to have camps everywhere. But a lot of people just like to sit on their hands and say, we should do this, and you should do that, and they need to do this. Well, we need your help. And you want to host one of our speakers, please contact us. We'd love to come out wherever that may be. So with that, I want to thank you for listening. God bless you. And until next week, have a great week.